Good morning. Welcome to the second keynote by Professor Carrie Mungenson. She is a distinguished professor of statistics and the director of Center of Data Science at Queensland University of Technology, Australia. He is an elected member of Australian Academy of Science, Australian Academy of Arts and Science, and Carrie research focus on basic statistics and other methods for modeling complex systems with application to health, environment, and sport. She's currently co-leading a major sporting analytics program at the QUT, as well as AUSTAR, which is Australian Sports Technology Analytics and Research Initiative, that is aimed to link entities involved in sports analytics across Australia. Please welcome Professor Carrie.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. And thank you to the organizers of this conference. It's been amazing and excellent organization, and how much goes on behind the scenes, so thank you. Right, I want to talk about Bayesian sports analytics, and I know that some of you in the room here work on this, and so I'd be pleased to have your comments at the end. So I'd like to acknowledge my co-workers in this area. There's many more that work in this field at QUT, but these are the people whose work I'll be speaking about today. And I'd like to start with an introduction to our Centre for Data Science. So this is our campus in Brisbane in Australia. You can see where Australia is, the little dot over there. And, where Australia's the dot, and Brisbane's the even smaller dot, the little red dot there. And this is our campus here. And so my office is about there, so you're welcome to come visit anytime, the door's open. So we have a Centre for Data Science, and it has about 140 researchers that go across the university. So these are employed by the university and aligned to the centre. And they come from different faculties, 5 different faculties, health engineering, science, and business and law, and creative industries, social science. We have 4 core programs and 11 applied domains. And you can see the types of disciplines that we include in our centre. That means it's very rich in terms of drawing from these different entities when we want to work on something like sport. And so our centre, these are our core programs here that we have, and we have a particular emphasis on responsible data science, complex data analytics, and models and algorithms. And you can see there are different applied domains, and the interesting thing about this then is we can bring the expertise and learnings from different areas to, for example, sport. And you can see that there's a strong focus there on sports systems. And so we've connected our Centre for Data Science with other centres for data science around the country. And so we have about 40 different centres for data science across the country in this Australian data science network. We're a large country, small population. This is a very fast-moving area, and we need to communicate. And this is really about promotion, sharing opportunities, coming together around particular topics like sport and sports analytics. And so, as we know, sports analytics then is big business. I don't need to tell you because you're in the business as well. You're part of this as well. And we know that sport analytics is really important for performance. And so for the elite athletes, and we have a great example here with the Paris 2024, we've had Wimbledon next. So in 26, we'll have in Milan, we'll have the Olympic Winter Games. And we can see that there's a lot of activity, especially in elite sports, but also in esports. And the sports analytics doesn't stop there, as we talked about yesterday. It also includes participation in communities. And so the real health effects and social benefits that can come from participating in sport at the community level, both for children, for adults, and then for older adults as well. And the important things then in this are around data and around tech, and these are our enablers and our challenges and opportunities in working in this space. And so some of the challenges and opportunities in Australia that have been seen are that our data are often siloed, and so that's and also inaccessible. So we talked about that yesterday as well. And also our area of data analytics in sport is quite underdeveloped. And so there's been a number of articles and media attention around this in the past. And so we were tasked by the Australian Institute of Sport, which we've had a long association with, and the Queensland Queensland Academy of Sport to come up with a solution. And really, this was pre this announcement of the Olympic Games, but certainly then motivated strongly by the announcement that Brisbane will host the Olympic Games in 2032. So this is great motivation and timing for us in the sports area and also in sports analytics to really start to put the heat under what we're doing and to grow this particular industry. And so with this in mind then, we were asked to find a solution, and the solution that we canvassed across, well, actually the Australian Institute of Sport actually asked in the first instance is this the right time for a national sports analytics hub? And when we asked this of the sports institutes around the country, we got a resounding yes, and that was about 6 years ago. And so what we've done then is really start the journey from our founding partners of Queensland Academy of Sport, Australian Institute of Sport and QUT, really starting to build the partnerships through sports industry research, asking this question, is the time right for a national analytics hub, starting to get new collaborators and really looking at this trajectory that we could build towards 2032. So what we've done then is to form this Australian Sports Tech Analytics and AI Research Hub, so Aussie Star. And it includes a number of partners that you can see there in the first instance, and we're inviting others into this. But this is really an opportunity or an umbrella, if you like, for the various activities that are happening around the country in sports analytics. It's really meant to be inclusive, and it's meant to then profile the work that we're doing in this area. And so we're also interested in international collaborations in this because we're all in the same game and we're working towards the same end. So we see this as a great opportunity to bring Australia's strengths together and then to share with the rest of the world. And the kinds of areas, when we asked our partners, our industry partners, our sports partners, the kinds of areas that they thought we should focus on, this is what we got, and these are our boxes. This is our consolidated list out of a very large list, but you can see the types of areas that they are interested in us working on in the methods space, if you like, in the development of the sports analytics. And I think that all of us could find something that we're doing in these boxes here. And so what we've done also is apply for, and we were successful in obtaining as a sort of foundation activity in the Aussie Star, is about 30 scholarships, PhD and Masters and Honours scholarships that are co-funded by our sports partners and CSIRO Data 61 in the area of sports analytics and AI. And so that will really grow over the next, there's students are being recruited now, they're domestic students, that will really grow Australia's talent and capability in the area of sports analytics over the next few years. And we're expecting that that will be a foundation that then we can grow on. So we're already getting other groups that want to, contribute, have students, have interns, and so on. And I know that in other countries this happens, but in Australia it really hasn't consolidated like this nationally, and we haven't really had this sort of opportunity to grow this this concentration of expertise for the next generation. So that's exciting for us. And the other thing that's exciting is that we've got some obviously some press out of this, and so it's very it's high profile at the moment in our world. And also we are QUT has contributed substantially to this effort. So they have put in co-funding for some chairs. So 3 level professor, associate professor positions co-funded by external organisations with postdocs and PhDs associated with them in the area of data science, sports science, and business and law. And the business and law is around the productivity of data. And so, so that will really then give us this expertise to sort of spearhead and lead this effort in Aussie Star. So we are seeking chairs, and we are seeking partners in this as well, and we're interested in collaborations as well. So if you know anybody who would be interested in that, then please ask them to talk to me. And we're also looking to set up or to apply for a Centre of Excellence. The Australian Research Council has a call out at the moment for Centres of Excellence. We've had one in the mathematical and statistical frontiers area before, but we're looking for one in the sports analytics one now. And this is a 7-year program, and it would start in 2026. We need to have the first application in this year. And it would be around the areas of performance, so elite, high-end performance for all participants to reach their goals, for participation in sport, community participation and the benefits that brings, and then in productivity of data, and that includes both the commercial value of sports data and also the privacy and ethics issues surrounding data. So in our, just as the work that we've been doing in terms of research then focuses on a number of areas. I've just put a couple of the papers here that I'll sort of talk about, and you can see the work on, it started in 2016 or before that actually, working on small effects in exercise and sports science, Bayesian approaches to that. And then you can see next gen models looking at Bayesian prediction of winning times here. And this is for, again, a later paper on this for the Olympics now, the Paris Olympics. So we'll see how we go. And also looking at injury that we talked about yesterday. So I'll touch on some of these, and you can see the red ones here are really our Bayesian papers here. So there's a fair focus on Bayesian analysis here. And just out of interest, I'll put a couple of papers that my colleague Chris Dravandi from QUT has written too, because there was talk about cricket yesterday, and Chris is very fond of cricket and writes these articles in the conversation and significance of this is science communication. So if any of you are interested in some debate, then Chris is up for it as well. So just as an analysis, as a primer for Bayesian statistics, and the way that I see it and the value of it is that we have some data X and we consider an unknown parameter theta. So this is the kind of thing that we're interested in. So this could be the effect of something, or the risk of something, or the magnitude of something that we're interested in, or the rate. We have some prior understanding of that unknown here, and we're going to express that through a prior distribution. And we're going to have a probability distribution for our data given the underlying parameters. And we want to update our knowledge of that given our data. And so the way that the architecture that we use for that then is we're going to use this Bayesian modeling approach, which says we're going to update our existing understanding of the unknown of interest given the data. And so this unknown will express as theta and our data as x. And so what we end up with then is an updated understanding about theta given the prior understanding about theta and the influence of the data. And the interesting thing here is that then we can express through this prior understanding of theta other information that we might have. And so this is typically what we would do in our heads. If we do an analysis based on the data, we take that analysis, we sort of we compare it with our understanding of the system at the moment, and we sort of trade off how much we believe our understanding and how much we believe the data. And this is really a formalization of that. So if we don't have much understanding or much prior information, then we rest on the data. If we have a lot of prior information and we put weight on that, then the data doesn't have as much. But this is a formal way of recognizing that sort of balance between our other information that we have and our data, and including that all in our analysis. And so what we get then is a prior distribution. You can see there the blue line here, and you can see that we might have a likelihood this is what the data is telling us, the red line, and what we end up with is some compromise in the middle, depending on the weighting of the data and the prior. And so what we find is that this is really useful in many contexts, and in fact, Nate Silver said a little while ago, in the past 10 years, it's hard to find anything that doesn't advocate a Bayesian approach. So that's what we work on. And what I'd like to do then is to just talk a little bit about why we do this, and also some of the case studies in this area. So why do we do it? Well, this, as I said, is a flexible method for combining different sources of evidence. We can characterize and propagate uncertainty and variation through these distributions. We get a posterior distribution of the estimates of interest. So we actually get, from this posterior distribution, we can talk directly about the probability of theta. And so we can look at then the probability that theta is over a particular threshold. We can compare different areas with respect to their probabilities. We have all of that information that's really about the probability. And so it's different from a frequentist approach in that way. And so I'd like to talk about, first off, about a review that we did a few years ago in 2019 on the just a Bayesian, a review of Bayesian analysis in sport. This was done or led by Edgar Santos Fernandez. And so when we looked through the literature at that time in 2019, we went through a whole range of different papers and came down to a paper, about 74 papers in the literature. That's exploded in the last 5 years. But at that time then, the main methods that were being used in Bayesian statistics in sport were these. And so you'd recognize some of these methods here at the time. And then we also have the different kinds of methods that were being used over time. So you can see at the beginning here, it was really just about regression. And then it became Bayesian hierarchical models. And then it moved through all the different kinds of models until 2018, when there was really, or 2017, 18, when there was this real diversity of models and really starting to use the architecture and opportunity in Bayesian statistics in sports applications. And you can see here the type of sports that had been the papers that have been used for the papers, or the focus of the papers. And so you can see basketball, and also most of the papers were for baseball, basketball, football, and then others as well. So I'd like to talk about 3 case studies just to illustrate the type of work that we're doing in this area. And the 3 case studies, firstly, just one on looking at different metrics and how we might use Bayesian statistics or the Bayesian architecture to come up with different methods. But also then the second one is to look at a way of modeling the system as a complex system. This is in injuries through a Bayesian architecture. And the last one is to talk about athlete data sovereignty and the Bayesian sort of approaches to that as well. And so the first case study is around finding the intrinsic dimension in this sort of high dimensional data. And what do I mean by high dimensional data? Well, we might have cycling data, for example, where we have an accelerometer on somebody, or we're tracking them around a track, and you can see here the intensity of the effort as they go around the track, and so the intensity is rising around the track, and you can also see their actual location. And the other type of high dimensional data we might have, of course, is from computer vision. So this is an example from the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Golden State Warriors. And the reason that we used this was these data were available online. They'd been kindly annotated by somebody, and the annotations of the images were also online. So this was available data. We talked yesterday about the need for that for our purposes. And so when we look at this kind of imagery, and if we do annotate it, then what can we gain from this? We know this is very high dimensional in terms of the information in this, and how can we actually consolidate that to something that we can manage and understand? And so what we'd like to know from this kind of, I'm going to focus on the basketball example, but it can be the same for many other examples. So is there a difference between home and away games? Are there differences between winning and losing teams? How is the placement of the players in attack and defence related to the success of a play? And do teams that have greater offensive ability produce successful shots from more unique locations on the court? They might be some of the questions that we ask, and we'd like to answer those using kind of computer vision that we have. And so this is a paper again led by Edgar, and involving a couple of other co-authors. And what we're going to do is just focus on then this NBA season 2015-16, play-by-play events, description and other statistics that are available online here. And from each play, we can find the locations of the players at the moment of the shot. So we're just going to look at the shoot and whether they missed it or made it. So we're just going to focus on that particular part of the game and have 15 games in the analysis. So what we're going to do is think about how to analyze that. So we have all of these players moving around the field, around the court, and we want to understand what's the sort of the intrinsic dimension of their movements. And so what we can think about is so for each player, if we look at their first neighbor, where their neighbor is, and their second neighbor. So for each player, their first neighbor and their second neighbor, and we look at the ratio of that. So you can imagine that if everybody's evenly spread across the court, then the ratio of the first neighbor to the second neighbor is going to be the same for each person, roughly. And that is going to be described through a Pareto distribution. And this Pareto distribution has a parameter D here. And this D is what is actually the intrinsic, called the intrinsic dimension. And so through this parameter here, we get an idea of what this kind of spread is between, the relative spread is between the players. Now, of course, players don't move in that sort of just nicely formed relationship. What happens is they move, some of them are tightly clustered, some of them are further apart, and that changes throughout the game. So what we can do instead is we can have a mixture of Paretos here. And so if you want the maths, it's here. But really what we're doing is we're going to have different kinds of components that describe the players that are more tightly clustered, the players that are further apart. And so this kind of extra information can be very useful in describing this intrinsic dimension that changes within a group and then across time. And the way that we can do this in a Bayesian framework is that we can have these variables, these latent variables Z here, that indicate for each athlete which group you belong to. So do you belong to the group that's more tightly clustered or the group that's further, like more dispersed? And this gives us then a sense of like, what's your intrinsic dimension for your cluster? And where do you belong? And it's probabilistic in terms of where you belong in that. So you can imagine that this is giving us a lot of information about how players are moving around the court. And it's also allowing us to have just this single parameter that's describing this. And we have priors on, these are kind of a situation where we can use quite generic priors because the data is going to tell us the story. So we have then, if we watch this, this is our intrinsic dimension as the game evolves. And so as the players move around the court, you can see down here how the intrinsic dimension is changing. Now, this is an example of the kind of results that we get from that then. This is the intrinsic dimension based on the teams that won or lost and at home or away. And we see that there's a difference in that intrinsic dimension between whether they're playing away or at home. And so this is some information that we can gain about play, if you like, between these different players. We can also see that as the score difference, the winning margin changes, so does this intrinsic dimension. So if you have a small difference, then you have a high intrinsic dimension. A large difference, you have a low intrinsic dimension. So the players are much more tightly clustered. Yeah. And so we can also see how that intrinsic dimension changes over the course of the play. And that's the kind of the graphic that I showed before. So this is one new metric that we have that we've been developed through this Bayesian architecture. So it can identify different stages in offensive actions, can translate complex movement patterns into more coherent statistics, identify clusters in shot chart data with lower or higher returns. That's really a guide then in planning more effective attacking and defensive plays. So that's one, case study one. Case study two is modelling subsequent injuries. And so this is, as we know, a sort of, there are different approaches for this, and many of the people in the room here have worked on this for subsequent injuries. There are survival models, there's hidden Markov models, and also Bayesian networks that are used for this. And I'd like to talk about a particular type of Bayesian network that we use for many applications in the injury and, for complex systems. And we'll start with just looking at injury and recovery as a complex system. So we have biomechanical, behavioral, psychological factors We also have the athlete in the context of their environment and their social and team and financial context. And so there's a lot of aspects that actually affect their injury and recovery. And also we have the kind of data then is just non-linear with lots of interactions, and we have these kinds of injuries and subsequent injuries that are related. So it's quite complex data as well. And so modeling this in the sort of the broader context, we can model it as a survival analysis, but we're going to miss all of this kind of broader environment, broader context, is to use a directed acyclic graph as a type of Bayesian network. And so many of you will be familiar with this, but we find these really useful. So we ask, what's the response? What are the factors that affect that response? What are the factors that affect those factors? And we build this kind of graphical model, if you like, of the system. And so part of this can be social, part of it can be environmental, part of it can be the individual athlete. And then we say, okay, that's a nice picture of what's going on. And instead of just putting it on the wall, what we can do then is we can quantify it. So for each of these nodes in the network, if we take just the ones in the circle there, G, this node here, when we quantify it, we only have to think about its parents, and we quantify G. And when we think about D, we only have to think about its parents, B and C, to quantify it. And so we're not trying to quantify the whole system at once. We're just quantifying each node conditional on its parents. And then we can run those probabilities through the model to get to the overall probability of the response. And we can make those probabilities either continuous probabilities or conditional probability tables. And we can take this information from different sources, from literature, from previous studies, from expert judgment. And so we're building all of this information into the single complex model. And when we do this then for one of the things I'd just like to touch on is what we're using in other studies. We've looked at using virtual reality and augmented reality for elicitation of expert information. And so more than just the ooh-ah, we talk about trying to get to the aha for this as well. So what can we learn from an expert that can then inform us about the system? And we can add that then either to our priors or to our conditional probability tables for a network. So we haven't tried that yet with athletes. We're just doing that at the moment. With athletes and with coaches to see if we can include that information into these Bayesian networks. So we see these Bayesian networks as a really good way of being able to describe complex systems and to be able to then incorporate all of this kind of information. So in our Bayesian network that was set up for the subsequent injuries, what we found by doing this then was that there were the three top priorities. So we can look at main priorities. We can also look at what are the most sensitive features. We can also, if we look at scenarios, if we change something in that model, what would happen to the outcome in the context of everything else. And also we can look at optimal configurations. If we want the best outcome, what would the configuration have to look like in all of the other factors to give us that? So that's the Bayesian framework coming back up through the model. And so when we did this in our preliminary work here, we found the most important factors are actually time of season, type of sport, and mental health. And of course, that's important for what coaches and athletes can prioritize. It was interesting that mental health came out as number 3. So our third study was based on athlete data. And in athlete data then, what we find is that our data is siloed, but also in many cases, our athlete data are siloed. But also for individual athletes, the question is whether they should actually own their data. And so there's a lot of talk about athlete data sovereignty. And if they own their data, what is the way in which they share that data? Well, should their data be publicly owned by owned by the team and then traded with them, or publicly available? So what happens with their data? And so we think about this for ourselves as individuals, but for sports people, this is obviously a really big issue. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about privacy and the legal and economic impacts of this, and trying to come up with ways that athletes and others, individuals, can own their data and license it basically for different activities. And there's, as we know, in Europe here, there's the GDPR, and there's a lot of discussion around this more generally around the use of data. And it obviously applies for athletes. And so what does statistics have to do with this? What does analytics have to do with this? Well, a lot. You know, we should be playing in this field as well. And so we think of the challenge and the solution. So data sets are held by different custodians, be it teams or athletes themselves. They can't be shared easily. One approach that we can look at, and we've been doing some work on, is federated learning. And so this is, does anybody work in federated learning here? Yeah, good. Okay, so this is analysis of the data without the data leaving the source. Typically what we would do is we would try to get all the data aggregated together and then do our analysis. This is actually leaving the data where they are, keeping it private, and you never share that data. So the different nodes won't see each other's data, but you will be able to collect the relevant components of that data or summaries of that data that you need for the analysis, and the analysis is done in the cloud. And if we do this, then this avoids a lot of the barriers that we might have around this. It increases the control of the data, it increases the potential to improve the data quality and timeliness. You know, data used is data loved. People will actually maintain their data in high quality if they know that it's being used, and also if they're seeing some benefit, because there should be some return to the athlete or to the team for the use of that data. And it increases the inferential capability from small or deep dispersed data sets. So if each of us just holds on to our own data, it's not really worth anything. But if we can combine it, then it can be worth something. And so how we can envisage this is in a health context, but we can think of it in the same context for sport.